apparently so did Yvette Cooper. This is according to this news now. And the quote is, due to the demands on their time, that Jess Phillips rejected a request to meet with Oldham Council in relation to the grooming gang scandal.
With all sorts of nonsense, where the fact was there were very good reasons why that council wanted that specific inquiry.
When Oldham Council desperately reached out for help with their grooming gang scandal, do you know what our safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips did? She sent them away with a dismissive letter, telling them to figure it out themselves by talking to other councils. No meeting, no support, no real action. This isn't just bureaucratic indifference. It's a complete abdication of responsibility by someone whose literal job title is Safeguarding Minister. Children's lives and futures hang in the balance, while Phillips couldn't be bothered to spare an hour of her time until the media spotlight forced her hand. What else is she hiding? Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favour. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now back to the video. The public outcry over Jess Phillips's behaviour has reached a fever pitch, and for good reason.
That Jess Phillips rejected a request to meet with Oldham Council.
With all sorts of nonsense, where the fact was there were very good reasons why that council wanted that specific inquiry.
When you're appointed as safeguarding minister, your primary duty is to protect the most vulnerable in society, particularly children. So when council officials from Oldham desperately reached out for urgent assistance with their grooming gang crisis, one would expect immediate action. Instead, what they received was a cold shoulder and a dismissive letter that speaks volumes about where Phillips's priorities truly lie.
As it requested government support to investigate the town's grooming gang scandal. So I'll just read that again. Jess Phillips rejected a request.
All sorts of excuses about why they wouldn't hold that extra inquiry which the council were asking for.
Oldham wasn't reaching out on a trivial matter. They were facing a devastating crisis with organised grooming gangs actively targeting vulnerable children. Council officials weren't requesting funds or resources they could get elsewhere. They were specifically seeking expertise, guidance and ministerial support from the very office tasked with addressing such horrors. They needed Phillips to fulfil her statutory obligation as safeguarding minister. Her response was telling. Rather than acknowledging the severity and urgency of the situation, Phillips sent what can only be described as a brush-off letter.
To meet with Oldham Council as it requested government support to investigate the town's grooming gangs scandal. The safeguarding minister...
You know, if you've done the research, as I have, and Jess Phillips certainly understood what went on in those grooming gangs.
The language she used betrayed a shocking lack of urgency, suggesting that Oldham's desperate plea for help with exploited children somehow wasn't worth an hour of her ministerial time. This wasn't a case of a busy schedule. It was a clear indication of what matters didn't rank on her priority list. The timeline makes this neglect even more damning. While Phillips found herself too busy to meet, Oldham Council was left waiting for weeks, then months, with no meaningful response from the government department specifically tasked with children's safety. Every day of delay potentially meant more children at risk, more lives that could have been protected had the safeguarding minister simply done her job. Elliot Keck from the Taxpayers Alliance captured the public sentiment perfectly.
Wrote to the local authority in December to say that neither her nor Home Secretary Yvette Cooper would be able to meet the council leadership.
So the fact that she's like saying, oh, we were too busy to even meet the council, I'm kind of flabbergasted by that, actually.
Do you think she can survive this?
The millions of Brits who have been horrified by the scale of this problem will be livid that Jess Phillips couldn't spare an hour to meet with Oldham Council to discuss the issue back in December. His words cut to the heart of the matter. If Phillips can't be bothered to address one of the most pressing issues within her ministerial brief, taxpayers have every right to question why they're funding her salary. Perhaps most telling was Phillips's suggestion that Oldham should simply consult with other areas facing similar issues rather than receiving direct government support. This wasn't just passing the buck, it was a fundamental abdication of ministerial responsibility. The role of safeguarding minister isn't to direct struggling councils to form their own support groups. It's to lead, coordinate, and provide the necessary government backing to protect children. What finally prompted action wasn't concern for vulnerable children, but media exposure. The government's stance shifted dramatically only after GB News highlighted Oldham's grooming scandal, placing intense scrutiny on Phillips and the Home Office. Only when their reputation was on the line did they suddenly find room in their schedules. By February, ministers who claimed they were previously too busy were sitting down with Oldham executives, discussing solutions they could have implemented months earlier. This pattern is all too familiar. In April, Phillips herself referenced their February meeting, a meeting that would never have happened without the media spotlight and resulting public pressure.
She does have a track record of campaigning for women and girls' safety when it's white perpetrators. And she does not want to deal with something that may involve the voters that she lost at the last election in that.
The unavoidable conclusion is that without journalists exposing this neglect, these children would still be waiting for help, while Phillips focused on matters she deemed more worthy of her attention. What makes millions of Brits truly livid isn't just this single instance, it's the recognition that Phillips's behaviour reflects a broader pattern of politicians protecting their careers, rather than vulnerable children. When those entrusted with safeguarding responsibilities only act when their reputations are threatened, we must question the entire system. How many other councils' pleas for help have been ignored because they didn't generate headlines? How many children have suffered while ministers claim to be too busy?
Apparently so did Yvette Cooper, this is according to this news now, and the quote is, due to the demands on their time, that Jess Phillips rejected a request to meet with Oldham Council in relation to the grooming gang scandal.
The timeline from December to February tells the real story. For months, Phillips claimed she couldn't find time to address what should have been her top priority. Yet magically, when public pressure mounted and media coverage intensified, her calendar cleared. This wasn't about capacity, it was about calculation. Political damage control trumped child protection until the political damage became too great to ignore. The Phillips scandal exposes a fundamental flaw in our political system.
And that makes it look as though, you could make the case anyway, that perhaps the victims and survivors of some of the most appalling abuse imaginable.
In some of the investigations, both local police and councils were seen to ignore a lot of these claims.
Yeah.
When those sworn to protect society's most vulnerable only spring into action after media spotlight threatens their career, we must question the entire framework of safeguarding in Britain. This isn't isolated to Phillips alone. It's endemic in Westminster's corridors, where child safety becomes a calculation of political risk rather than a moral obligation. The pattern repeats with devastating consequences. Ignore until exposure, then perform concern for cameras. The most haunting question isn't about Phillips's individual failure, but about countless children whose suffering never makes headlines, whose pleas for help remain buried in ministerial inboxes, sacrificed on the altar of political convenience.